Welcome back to Control the Freak. Today we're going to look again at some more DDE coercive behaviour. So, as I said, we're going to have a look at some perfectly normal, perfectly innocuous situations where people should be able to manage their own reactions and behave reasonably, but we know that control freaks don't do that. As we go through these two scenarios that I'm going to give you, try and concentrate not so much on the detail of the story, but the detail of how the control freak reacts, because they'll twist things and manipulate things to a certain outcome. And what we want to do is understand why, so that we can apply it to any kind of scenario. These two scenarios are just guides for you. We're going to start, as always, with Dave and Sarah. As I say, I'm getting old and I can't remember names very well. I always remember faces, but I'm terrible with names. And they're just two names that I remember quite easily. So let's have a look at the first scenario. Dave and Sarah. Dave and Sarah have been together for a couple of years. Sarah gets a call from her friend Leanne. Her friend Leanne is home to see her parents for one night. Sarah and Leanne used to go to college together and they were thick as thieves years ago. Leanne's only got one day at home and she's desperate to see Sarah before she has to go back home. So she asks Sarah if they can meet up for a drink. And Sarah's really, really excited about this and she says, of course we can meet for a drink. Sarah texts Dave and says, can I be home late this evening? I need to go and see Leanne. I haven't seen her for years and I'm really excited. And that's where things start to go downhill. Dave responds via text and says, I planned for us to watch a film. I was going to order as a takeaway and I planned a cosy night in. And he doesn't put any kisses at the end of the text, and he always puts kisses at the end of the text. And the fact that he doesn't tell Sarah he's not happy. Sarah responds, sorry about that. I'm really desperate to see Leanne. She's going back home tomorrow. I'm not going to see her again for God knows how long. Do you mind? Dave says, I think it's a bit inconsiderate. I'd already made plans. And again, he omits the kisses. Sarah can tell now that Dave isn't happy. So she goes back and she says, really sorry about that. I didn't know that you'd made plans, but I've only got this one chance. Again, she's going home tomorrow. Dave escalates a little bit in the next response. He says, I think you're being unfair. I think you're being unreasonable. And I think you're trying to guilt trip me because you're just trying to see your friend. I've made plans and I want you to come home. Sarah takes a couple of minutes. She can feel that Dave isn't very happy at all. After a couple of minutes, she texts him back and she says, really sorry about that. I promise I'll make it up to you. And she's doing that kind of feminine thing where she's promising some kind of physical reward. She's trying to lighten the mood, basically. And Dave says, I think you're being really inconsiderate. Do what you want. You will do anyway. But if you get too drunk and you lose your keys, I'm not letting you in. And that's how the conversation ends. So let's have a look at that. Did Sarah do anything wrong? Well, of course she didn't. Dave is doing the usual DDE equation. Demand, disproportionate benefit, escalation. And the demand starts very quickly with Dave's response, where he deliberately omits the kisses. He knows he's sending a message to Sarah. He always puts kisses on the end. And the fact that he doesn't, and he does it a couple of times here, he's telling her he's not happy. And he's making a subtle, implied demand by omitting those kisses. He knows that's going to rattle Sarah, and it does. He starts very quickly with the disproportionate benefit. He talks about the plans that he's made. Now, this would be fine if Sarah carried on doing this all of the time, if she was always going out late, and Dave was always having to make plans that he was having to cancel because Sarah was going out late. But she's not. She hasn't seen Leanne for years. This is a one-off. Most of the time, Sarah goes straight home to Dave. But this one time, she wants to see a friend. But he wants her to consider his feelings first. He also starts with you're being unreasonable. This isn't fair. You're trying to make me feel bad. He's trying to make Sarah carry his emotional burden. He's trying to disproportionately benefit himself there by making her think about how he feels. He also does a quite ironic guilt trip claim, where he claims that she's trying to guilt trip him. All the time, he's trying to do that to her, clearly. He's trying to say how unfair it is to him. He's already made plans, and all she's bothered about is going out and getting drunk with her friend. Finally, he escalates, and he says to her, do what you want anyway. But he also tells her that if she gets drunk, he's not letting her in. So there's a punishment to this behaviour. If Sarah chooses to spend the time with her friend, there's going to be punishment. Try and understand what's going through Dave's mind here. He knows that Sarah keeps saying please in these messages. She keeps saying, please, can I see my friend? And that tells you that Sarah already feels that she needs to say please. That's game over with somebody like Dave. He knows that she's asking for permission. And control freaks operate on permission, as I keep saying. So Sarah already knows that she needs permission to do these things. What Dave's probably also doing as well is he's future-proofing, and this is what control freaks do. The minute that she said she's going out with a friend, Dave is already drawing a line between A and C, and he's missing all the bits in the middle, and he's kind of already arriving at a conclusion. He's thinking of a worst-case scenario, and he's already convinced himself of that worst-case scenario, and it could be two things. One is that if he says yes to this, Sarah's going to think she can do it all the time, and Dave can't have that. He's got to protect himself against that straight away. But he's also probably thinking, what might happen if Sarah goes to the pub with Leanne? He doesn't know Leanne. For all he knows, Leanne is a very flirty girl. She might get talking to boys, which means that Sarah's going to talk to boys. For all he knows, she's not even meeting Leanne. He's never met her. So who is Leanne? In his mind, he's going to be thinking of all these possible scenarios, and he's trying to future-proof against what he's guessing is going to happen. Remember, I always say with control freaks, they draw conclusions based on their worst fears. And all the way through, once they've made that decision that this is the likely outcome, they're not looking for reassurance that they're wrong. They're looking for confirmation that they're right. So Sarah's off to a losing start straight away. He's already suspicious, and he's convinced himself the worst possible outcome. The worst possible outcome being that Sarah will either decide that she can do this all the time, and he can't have that, or that Sarah is going to start cheating on him. So he's putting his foot down very, very early on. The likelihood also is that the fact that Dave escalated to a threat so quickly tells me that he's probably already laid the groundwork in this relationship. He was quite comfortable going to, I'm not going to let you in, accusing her of wanting to go out and get drunk, and that's her priority, and saying, I'm not going to let you in if you do that. That tells you that Dave has already laid the groundwork, because you wouldn't be comfortable escalating to something like that over a simple request, a request, by the way, to go and see a friend that you haven't seen for years, which is perfectly reasonable. Dave is behaving like a typical control freak does, and Dave is just escalating based on his fears. Let's have a look at another scenario. And this scenario will use Lisa and Steve. I'll try and remember those names, but forgive me if I slip back into Sarah and Dave, because, as I say, I'm terrible with names. I'm really good with faces, but I'm terrible with names. Lisa and Steve. So they've been together a couple of years now, and it's not what you'd call a really happy relationship. There's already issues. Lisa is experiencing a problem that's quite common with women of a certain age. So she goes along to a GP for some reassurance. She takes the afternoon off work, and she goes along, and the GP says, look, I'm 99% sure there isn't a problem, but to make you feel better, we'll run a couple of tests, but I don't think there's anything. Lisa leaves the doctors much more reassured. She's quite happy, but the happiness is short-lived. A couple of days later, she gets a phone call from Steve. Steve isn't happy. He's got a letter, and he's opened it, and it's from the GP, and it says that they've run some tests, and that basically everything's all right. But Steve didn't know about this appointment, and he's not happy about it. He wants explanations. All the way home, Lisa is rattled. All she can think of is that she went to the doctors for a perfectly reasonable thing. It's not really got anything to do with Steve. And now Steve's unhappy. When she gets home, Steve is at the door, open letter in hand, face like thunder. And Lisa enters the house. Steve wants an explanation. So she gently takes the letter from Steve, and the first thing she can see on the letter is that it says private and confidential. She opens the letter, and again, it reassures her that there's nothing wrong at all. So she's kind of clouded at the minute. She's being bombarded by Steve at the moment. He's standing over her, he's very angry, and he wants an explanation. But all she can think of is, this is nothing. I don't understand what he's angry about. So she says to him, this letter says private and confidential. Why did you open it? And Steve's incredulous at this. He says, "You're my wife. Private and confidential means important. If it's important about you, I need to know about it. That's why I opened it. We shouldn't have secrets from each other." Steve knows a little bit about this problem. He's not the brightest tool in the box, but he's heard of this problem before. And he knows that in some cases, it is linked to a potential STI. If you really wanted to kind of take it there, you could surmise that it's linked to an STI. But he never lets Lisa out of his sight. Doesn't matter though, he's suspicious at this point and he's demanding reassurance. So they go through to the living room and they sit down, and Steve wants a full explanation of the symptoms, when they happened, and why she felt the need to go to a doctor and why she felt the need to not tell him, because he's saying she kept it secret from him. As the conversation progresses, he wants to know about her movements the week leading up to the appointment. And then as proof, he wants to look at her social media. He wants to see who she's been talking to in the week leading up to her appointment. So she has to open her WhatsApp, her Facebook, her Instagram. He wants to see who she's been talking to. So she has to sit there and go through all of her messages and all of her exchanges with people online. Steve is really focused on the deception here. He's saying that she's deceived him. She kept this secret from him. And he wants to know what the link is between this appointment and this potential STI problem. Lisa says to him, "I think you're being unreasonable. You've jumped to a conclusion here and you're blaming me for something that hasn't happened. The doctor says in the letter there isn't a problem here. Why don't you trust me?" And she says to him, "You must have had doctor's appointments. In all the time we've been together, you must have had doctor's appointments that you haven't told me about and I haven't asked you about." And Steve says, "That's because I'm trustworthy. I would have told you. Up to now, I've given you no reason not to trust me, but we can't say the same for you here. You've deceived me." And this goes on long into the night. The night ends with Steve demanding the passwords to all of her social media. She's definitely got something to hide. He's decided that. So let's have a little look at what's going on here and why Steve is behaving this way. So as always, let's look at the issue of the demand. Steve thinks that as her husband, he has the demand, the right to open her letters. And you can kind of see a twisted logic there, can't you? It says private and confidential. And Lisa's his wife, it's important to him. And if it's private, it must mean it's important. You can kind of follow this logic a little bit. But Steve is missing out on the key word here, private. He doesn't have any right to open her mail just because he's her husband. If there's anything to worry about and he trusts Lisa, she's going to tell him what's going on. The key word here is private, and he does not have the right to make the demand to open her mail. This letter doesn't say only to be opened by patient and spouse. It says private. And this should be the first warning sign. Steve has already managed to kind of manipulate a situation where he believes he's got the right to make that demand and that Lisa should have nothing to say about it. And now we're already moving into disproportionate benefit. It's only beneficial to Steve that he opens this mail. Lisa would never open his mail. He's already made sure of that in the lead up to this relationship. The fact that he's going straight in and behaving like this tells you there's a disproportionate benefit to Steve. That he felt the right to make that demand in the beginning to open her mail is already disproportionately beneficial to Steve. But also, when Lisa questions him on it and says, "Well, you must have had GP appointments that I've never asked you about," he manages to turn that around and says, "Well, that's because I'm trustworthy and you're clearly not." So he's already arguing that he has the benefit to open her mail and that she has got no right to ask him about that. And then we move to escalation. And the escalation is that he sits her down for hours, goes through her social media, and then at the end of the night, he wants access to all of her social media accounts. There's no benefit there to Lisa allowing him that access. It's only beneficial to Steve. And it's also an escalation. Demanding access to somebody's social media. And that disproportionate benefit also leads into escalation. So it started early on with the demand that I should be able to open your mail. There's the disproportionate benefit that I get to do it and you don't because you've got no reason not to trust me. Then takes us into escalation, where he demands access to her social media, and at the end of the night he demands the passwords to all of her social media. So there's going to be an ongoing punishment here. That's where your escalation is. And this is all about the control freak's pattern of linking point A and point C and filling in the gaps in the middle. As far as he's concerned, this is all about deceit. Lisa lied to him. There's a tenuous link to some kind of STI problem that's incredibly tenuous. It's only there if you really want to look for it. And he's already decided that because he believes that to be the case, he's now got the right to punish Lisa. He's got access to all of her social media until time immemorial. Again, Steve has probably already laid the groundwork to get here. You wouldn't react like that to somebody getting a letter from a GP. If my missus got a letter from a GP and it said private and confidential, I wouldn't even think of opening it. In fact, we come home every day and there's letters on the doorstep, and I separate the mail and I put hers there and I put mine there. I don't even look at it. Nobody should. Private means private. You haven't got the access to your partner's letters unless they decide to give it to you. But I don't know why you would. This is all about future-proofing. This is all about making sure that Lisa is constantly on edge, that she never even thinks of betraying Steve's trust. I'm going to go through that again. Demand, disproportionate benefit, escalation. You can see that in both of these stories here. You can see where in the first instance there's a subtle demand with the omission of the kisses. But in the second one, there's a much more explicit demand that I have the right to open your mail. And you can see where that leads to disproportionate benefit. In the first instance, it's that you consider my feelings. In the second instance, it's that I get to do that, but you don't. And ultimately, it leads to punishment. It leads to, I get to do this from now on. In other words, if you go out drinking, I get to lock you out because I'm not happy about it. And I get access to all of your social media in the second case. It doesn't really matter what goes on in these scenarios. You need to look out for demand, disproportionate benefit, escalation. Look out for subtle demands and explicit ones. And if you've already reached the point of starting with explicit ones, the groundwork has been laid and you need to be very, very careful with that person. In fact, I would say if you can't have a reasonable conversation about it at that point, you need to get out. But that equation, demand, disproportionate benefit, escalation, is one that if you can identify it, you're going to save yourself an awful lot of pain. I hope that's been some kind of use to you. We'll keep revisiting this one because it is fundamental to understanding how coercive people work. In the meantime, I'll leave you with the usual stuff down here. If you want to share your stories there and you don't mind them being shared with other people, and obviously you can remain anonymous and I won't share your details, or by all means, hit me up there if you want some kind of private advice, if you want to understand what's going on in your relationship if you're not sure. Before I go, like, share and subscribe. I always forget to do that, and by all means share it as much as you like to. In the meantime, I'll leave you with the usual. Control the freak, not other people. I'll see you next time. Behave.